Vichy Vichy sounds like a side rapper, like a guy who's like, is I don't know, he's like some guy who just appeared on a 2 Chainz track. Like you're like, who's this guy? And it's like from his neighborhood.
Lil Vichy.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, you could probably keep this, by the way.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared.
And I'm Michael Hayden.
Thanks for tuning in another week. There has been a lot of news, Mike. I kind of feel like I am a kid getting a drink out of the water hose, but the water hose is turned into like
piss,
Niagara Falls. Piss, yes, and also piss.
We're all drinking piss.
Leading the news this week has been Elon Musk's just like dismantling of government piece by piece. It's like him and this gaggle of young men, 6 of which have been identified by news outlets. They range from 19 to 25. Some of them are still in school, but they follow Elon Musk around, find, a server room. It feels like a Hollywood movie, right? You walk in and you're like, where's the mainframe? And then you stick a flash drive into it and go hacker mode. They put on a ski mask and start coding or something. But, they're going in, basically doing hostile takeovers of government agencies one by one and going through all the data, doing keyword searches for terms like DEI. And they also took control of payment systems, and they have just frozen payments for all kinds of things in the government.
Well, one thing that interests me about this is Trumpism has always been sold to us as this kind of working class movement, almost like a right-wing Bernie Sanders type thing. Nobody ever really talks about the government programs, but the idea is just like Daddy Trump is going to take care of everybody. And nationalism is we bring it together and we just kind of shave off the outsiders, the immigrants, right? Our scapegoats. And it's just going to make us stronger. There's a very fascistic idea, but it was the idea is that you're going to lift up the poor. Really, the idea is the white, working class, right?
The quote unquote right people are going to be taken care of.
Or the right ideology. It really is a kind of extreme version of the Mitch McConnell way of seeing almost. It's almost like this complete rich, poor, extreme ideology being injected into the government at a very, very fast pace. And you see Trump's approval ratings ticking down amidst this. And I have to say that, you see a lot of pushback from Trumpists about the people saying, I didn't vote for this. I mean, I really do think a lot of Trumpers are probably a little bit shocked at how rapidly they're attacking the government, because like I said, the Steve Bannon version of this has been completely sidelined.
So going back to DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, because that's what's happening. Efficiency is when you make sure the government doesn't do anything for you. That's what the most efficient thing to do is? It's to not do anything.
Right.
So these young guys that Doge has brought in, essentially minions. Musk is a minion of Trump, and these are the minions. These are like if Trump is Gru from the Minions movies and Elon Musk is one of the little yellow guys. This is like whatever pet they have. This is these kids. And the Wall Street Journal put out a story, kind of a banger, to be honest, about a 25-year-old Doge employee named Marco Ellis, who they found had used a Twitter account, just months before taking on this position. And in recent years, that express all kinds of crazy, just insane racist shit. One quote that they pulled was, quote, you could not pay me to marry outside my ethnicity. In another post the same month, it said, normalize Indian hate. Lots of hate from this person about Indian people who work in tech sectors. So the Wall Street Journal works on this story, and they asked the White House for comments about it, and this guy resigned. Now you have both Elon Musk and JD Vance, the vice president, hopping in to say that somebody who less than a year ago posted, quote, just for the record, I was racist before it was cool, deserves a second chance. These controversial social media posts should not, they're unrelated to his job suffocating government agencies. So let's give him another chance, man. Well, and they keep talking about him like a kid. He's 25. Well,
I need to interject here that Musk has not said, let's bring him back. What Musk did was he did a poll, yeah. which is why if you're picking one or two to be the more contemptible between Trump and Musk, I actually think that Musk is the one who takes it, because Trump would just do something, whereas Musk does these completely craven polls, and he knows what the result is going to be before he asks them, but he uses it. No, I mean, who is responding to an Elon Musk poll on X? I only log on to that site now to monitor far-right figures. I don't do it for any other reason than that, other than when Hannah sends me a tweet to retweet. I do not, post on that site. I keep my thing locked. It's too disgusting on there. So this loser goes and puts a poll out there, and he knows already what the result is going to be before he asks, but he does it because he's too insecure. So that way he can point to whomever, maybe his Tesla shareholders, and say, like, look, people wanted this. I actually think that whatever 70 something percent I saw last I checked was actually pretty low, considering the amount of people on there who are just pro Musk and will do anything he says. That was the first thing. And then JD's was cowardly for a completely different reason.
Right. Yeah. We were talking about that earlier.
For people who don't know, my children are mixed Indian, and so are JD's. So we share that in common. And I got to say, if I was out there kind of standing for some guy whose primary internet campaign is increasing Indian hate or whatever it was, you put a bullet in the back of my head, quite frankly, because that is just the most sad, pathetic thing. If you can't stand up for your own children, his wife, whatever, maybe she's involved in the whole thing. Maybe he consulted with her first, but your own children, I mean, really, that's absolutely pathetic.
I think it reveals a couple things which might seem obvious, but kind of underscores just how bad the problem is, even with elected officials, who are not above the riffraff. The way that people like JD Vance or Christopher Rufo, or God forbid, Ian Miles Chong, are defending this is not by defending what this young man had said online. It's indefensible. They can't defend it. So instead, what they do is they say the real problem is the media. The journalists who figured this out and wrote about it, it's critical that we tell them to go fuck themselves.
Yeah.
So we have to bring him back. And I think what that really is, a hall pass for everybody else who is in the Trump administration that feels this way. It is essentially a signal that you can just go crazy.
It's loathsome, but it's part of a payback campaign for what they perceive to be what journalists did to them since 2015, 2016, when the alt-right movement started to move up. The thing that interests me about it is that this doubling down that is happening right now, it's happening at the same time we see the stock market starting to drop. You see a lot of nerves rattled around potential inflation. It was like another plane loss today. the country's starting to look shakier and shakier. And I think Trump had one of the bigger falls of approval rating, or faster falls of approval rating of a sitting president in recent memory. Now it'll fall and it'll land on that base, which can be completely unbreakable. But I do think that this emphasis on internet bullshit, like, propping up guys who've said racist things, this, that, and the other thing, is going to start wearing on people pretty fast if the country starts taking a turn. And, everything we have seen suggests that it might, particularly around things like, flu shots, which may not be available next year and things like that. Yeah. If people are freaking out about these things, if the economy goes southward, the jobs report was decent relative to everything, but I don't see any reason why it would continue to be decent based upon the concerns about inflation, right? If things are shaky, people are going to get real pissed off that the main priority of these people seems to be propping up groypers.
Yeah. And it's not just young kids in Doge. It is people like Darren Beattie, who Marco Rubio, supposed moderate, steady hand of the administration, tapped to be an undersecretary. There he will join the director of policy, Michael Anton, who, to be clear, is not Darren Beattie levels of insane and vile, but he's a weird cat. Well, he's very, very strange cat. Runs in some fairly questionable circles, to say the very least.
Yeah, I have some fun Darren Beattie stories that were not covered in your MSNBC piece, which is one when I reached out to comment for a couple of years ago, he responded by asking me a series of questions, trying to ascertain my relationship to Michael V. Hayden, the former CIA director. And the people who promoted the idea that I was related to him were all like kind of 4chan, all people who were like on Gab and things like that, who, the kind of people who have, who are not 100% there, who see my name, Michael Hayden, and assume we have to be related, even though both Michael and Hayden are obviously very common names. And, I was like, are you serious? He's like, no. He's like, was it your uncle or are you his son? What? Like, and I was like, reading the emails, I was like, I thought this guy was supposed to be really smart, but I mean, that shows you how steeped he is in the right wing swamp stuff, right? Like he's like really glued into it. And the other thing is that I have had the misfortune of reading text messages that Darren Beattie sent to somebody who he was trying to date, and they were really, really uncomfortable, and I will not embarrass that person, but he was rebuffed.
What a surprise.
It was before his eraser head hairdo, that he's kind of got going now, so maybe you should try again.
One thing I want to get your take on before we go to our interview with Julia is all this reporting that Elon Musk taking over the government via Doge and all this media attention and all this controversy is somehow making him enemies within the West Wing, or that maybe Trump doesn't like him. This seems to get like every outlet seems like they have their own version of that storyline going. I'm not buying it.
I'm actually not buying it either. I'm glad that you asked me, because we didn't speak about this beforehand, but look, he's got more money than God, this guy. And he helped put Trump in the White House, and he can do whatever he wants. And he needs Trump because Trump was the one who was elected. So they kind of need each other. And it was only a couple hours ago that Trump posted from his official account a picture of him, Musk, and Tucker Carlson, his underlings there, wearing gigantic MAGA hats that made him look extremely foolish, while Trump, looks normal. Well, he never does, really. But, the point is, I don't see this breaking because the needs are on both sides. You have one guy is able to essentially continue to siphon money off of the government, which he's been doing in different ways. Now it's in an extraordinarily accelerated way. And then you have Trump, and there's also this kind of zero-sum game. They're heading towards a cliff, right? If Trumpism implodes, the backlash to it is going to be so severe that everybody involved in this is going to face tremendous consequences. That's one thing. And then as far as Musk is concerned, I mean, people don't want to buy his cars anymore. People are flipping off people who are driving those rolling trash cans, those cyber trucks. They're flipping them off on the highway. People are tagging up cyber trucks. People are tagging up Tesla headquarters. People don't, even if you are right wing, there is a tax on buying a Tesla right now because people look at you as an asshole, and you need to be able to make friends. So Musk needs the government. Musk needs Trump, right? And Trump needs Musk because Musk has got all the money and he's got the communication device in X. So I don't see it falling apart anytime soon. If backlash takes them under, it's going to take them both under at the same time.
I don't believe this rift is real because at the end of the day, what Elon Musk is doing with Doge is a very like ham-fisted way of doing it, but ultimately like what the conservative movement's plan was for this presidency, which is to go into agencies, rip them down to the skeleton, fill in whatever you need with absolutely critical staff and a bunch of political appointees. And, you know, the effect that all of that has is giving more directive power to the president. So even if Trump talks to Elon and, you know, turns around and does, you know, that motion where it's like, oh man, this fucking guy, I fucking hate this dude. You know, the fact is he is, you know, showing up with a proverbial dump truck of like new power over the government and dropping it off at Trump's doorstep, meaning that the decisions in this country get made by a smaller and smaller and smaller number of people. So even if he hated Elon Musk, there is a utility around, right? And like, yes, Trump has egos and insecurities and like has thrown people to the curb in the past who he just got bad vibes from or whatever, I guess. But a lot of that came down to loyalty. And Musk is like religiously devoted to Trump because he has to be for the reasons you mentioned. Right?
Well, yeah. The one thing I would add is just because the partnership will survive, likely survive, I should say, does not mean they will like each other. I want to make that very clear because, you know, sociopaths like this, you know, they're destined to hate each other eventually.
I'm going to take the opportunity to grab that small piece of silver lining that you just threw out there and use it to take us to our interview with senior reporter from The Guardian, Carrie Wong.
And how are you holding up right now in this particular moment, just as a person? Like, how are you doing? Hey, laugh, it's fine.
Julia's just sitting there thinking, like, oh, I thought I was going to come talk about my piece, and now I'm in
yeah,
in
you are.
psychotherapy.
But I want to know how I want to know how you're doing right now because everybody's going through something.
Yeah, it's rough. This is scarier than I thought it was going to be. It's happening faster than I thought it was going to happen, and the amount of kind of pushback and defiance that we're seeing from the opposition is not as firm as I would have hoped. It's pretty scary. I was on a long leave of absence from work, and I just came back in January, and so this is quite an adjustment to jumping back into, you know, complete craziness.
Yeah, it's like getting out of bed and stepping on a treadmill.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can identify with that to a degree because I spent all of 2024 working on my book, and I was offline, and now I'm online. It's like it's really wearing on me. I felt like today I would just kind of just not search or look at anything today, and it benefited me. So we're talking about your piece for The Guardian called "Capitulating to Trump." Why people are warning about Vichy America. I'm pronouncing that correctly. And just give me your simplest explanation of what that means. Like, what is that reference? And, what motivated you to write it? What were you seeing out there?
So Vichy France, or Vichy France, is the name that's given to the unoccupied, quote unquote, free zone of France during World War II. At the beginning of World War II, Germany invades France. And unlike in World War I, where it got like immediately bogged down into, just awful attrition, trench warfare, Germany very, very quickly, rapidly bust through France's defenses and just they took hundred thousands of soldiers captive. They killed about 100,000 French soldiers, and they just completely rolled over the French military. And they start marching on Paris and occupying the country. And the French government basically just goes into complete chaos. It was a very kind of sclerotic regime. There was, this is kind of the France that it was a republic. It was the Third Republic, but there was a lot of issues kind of politically. Ultimately, there was a dispute between those who wanted to fight on, go take the military, retreat to Northern Africa, because France was an empire and they held Algeria at the time, and stay allied with the Allies and continue fighting. And there were those who said, you know what, we should make a deal. Well, it'll be better for the French people if we call for an armistice and come to some agreement so that maybe Germany will treat us better than they're treating Poland. And ultimately what happened was the generals who wanted to keep fighting fled, and they went to London and started the Free French and the government in exile. But Marshal Philippe Pétain, who had been this great World War I hero who had kind of saved France at Verdun, he became the prime minister, and he signed an armistice with Germany. He agreed to the occupation of most of, the north of France, all of the Atlantic coastline. And he would set up kind of this rump state in the southern portion of France that would be kind of putatively independent and at the same time allied with Germany and under a huge amount of all sorts of kind of agreements that having to provide labor and money and all sorts of stuff to Germany. And so that was Vichy France. And it's kind of, it has remained kind of as like an avatar kind of historically of collaborationism and cowardice, basically. After the war, in the immediate aftermath of the war, the French, Charles de Gaulle, who had been the leader in exile, he came back and he led the country, and he kind of worked to create a myth that France was a country of 40 million resistors, that everybody in France, whether they were in the occupied zone or the unoccupied zone, had been, at least passively resisting and had opposed what the Nazis were doing. But that was actually just utterly untrue. And it took until like the late 1960s for historians to get access to some of these archives and to be able to show that actually the French, Pétain and his collaborators, they were pretty eager and willing to collaborate with the Germans. They very quickly turned Vichy France into a dictatorial regime with, it was no longer a republic. It was no longer the republic that came out of the French Revolution that believed in liberty, equality, and fraternity. It became this very conservative, very religious, and very anti-Semitic authoritarian state. And in 1940, without even the prompting of Germany, which at that point in time had no interest in doing anything about Jews in France, they passed a series of anti-Semitic laws stripping citizenship and rights from tens of thousands of Jews in France. And then ultimately, several years later, many of those French Jews were deported and killed by Germany. But those anti-Semitic laws, France had kind of always pretended and purported that this had been the fault of the Germans and that this was Nazism and not anything that had to do with France. But it was actually, this was very domestic politics.
So essentially, it's just sort of like, don't hit us here. We're doing the same thing that you're doing. Don't worry. We're like you. We're okay. Is that essentially the anti-Semitic laws? I don't 100% know. I will say that, this is the France of the Dreyfus affair. France had its own very intense and very kind of French anti-Semitism that was different which still persists.
Yes. And it was different than the Nazi anti-Semitism. It was related, but it wasn't exactly the same flavor. And so they, I don't know exactly, all of the calculations that went into this, but at a time when nobody had said to, in a certain way, people now are talking a lot about like complying in advance, but like nobody had actually said you have to do this. They went ahead and did it anyways. And I mean, ultimately, the one thing that historians have found looking back is that it didn't work. They were not actually treated better by the German occupiers than Belgians or other countries that did not reach an armistice. So they did not actually succeed in protecting the civilian population of France at all from any of the hardships that were brought on by this occupation. And they also collaborated and willingly gave up, 75,000 Jews who were murdered.
It's not a clean parallel, but I'm starting to see why people are invoking, Vichy as a reference point for our modern political problems, right? There does seem to be a lot of, what people are calling obeying in advance. And also just this kind of thought, it's not even Trump exclusive. You see this overseas. You've seen this through several elections now of, in the US, we have two parties, right? So it's the Democrat would be the opposition party here, making some kind of calculation, seeing the rise of, a largely hate motivated right-wing populist movement and thinking, well, you know what, if we just give them a little bit of what they want, then maybe that will satiate them. This will be better for the country. We'll move that way a little bit, or we'll change our messaging to match that a little bit more. And instead of fighting it, they try to meet it there. And it has been a disaster for every political party that has tried to do this. There is no reward on the other side. There is no meeting this movement that at its fundamental core wants to destroy you at any cost. Before we kind of move on, talk about sort of the dynamics that are happening today that are causing people to make these comparisons. You did speak to one historian for your piece, Robert Paxton, who kind of disagreed with this comparison or didn't think it was appropriate, and instead said a better comparison to this moment is probably Mussolini. What was your conversation with Paxton like? What was his theory of why maybe Mussolini's a better comparison point?
Yeah, so Paxton is actually, he is the historian who completely changed kind of all of the historiography of Vichy France. He was an American, and in the late 1960s, he went to try to uncover what had been going on, in Vichy France. And he actually got access to the German archives because France was keeping their side of the archives under wraps. And so he was the one who first kind of wrote the book and exposed that this was, that the whole idea of 40 million resistors was a myth, that there had been willing collaboration, and that a lot of, the worst of the Vichy regime was completely driven by French politics and French leaders and had nothing to do with the occupiers at all. I was not able to speak with him directly. He is quite elderly and retired, but I was able to email with him a bit. And since working on Vichy and French history, he went on to be a historian of fascism, and he's written kind of a big book, The Anatomy of Fascism, which I'm currently reading, so I don't know the whole story, but it's very good. And he kind of, a couple of years ago, he kind of came out and said that he had changed his mind. And after, the fascism debate had been going on among historians and social, political scientists for a long time. And he kind of came around after January 6th and said, yes, this is a fascist movement based on his analysis.
I just want to interject and just say, I'm so much more focused on the present than I am on the past. But when I think of who Trump reminds me of in the past, it's always been Mussolini, because of the sort of clownish performative. I think, at least visually, the way when you see speeches of Mussolini and the way he moves and those type of things, like the move of the way Trump, like the performative thing of like hugging the was it a fireman's jacket he did on stage and things like that. This kind of showman style just seems so similar to the way Mussolini would perform to his crowd.
Yeah, and kind of the clownishness. I think that
yes.
Trump uses kind of humor and lack of seriousness in a way that I think other fascist leaders kind of are much more self-serious and kind of always in the domineering, angry dictator mode. But so Paxton said he told me by email that he thought that basically that the Vichy analogy just didn't work, because the conditions for Vichy were an invasion by a foreign power and then the threat of occupation. And that was not what was happening in the United States.
Yeah. I feel like being invaded is definitely like a much larger, like loaded gun pointed at your head, right?
Yeah.
Was that kind of the point he was making?
Yes. I mean, it's a completely different dynamic than we had an election, and this is the direction that our populace chose. And so his point, though, which I think, was well taken, is that similarly Mussolini was elected. And this occurred, while there was a lot of pressure on the democracy, such as it was. And ultimately, Mussolini used the so-called March on Rome, which I guess I didn't really know this history that well, but in the Paxton book that I'm reading now, he kind of goes into how it wasn't really a march on Rome. It was kind of a mirage. But they managed to kind of create this sense of menace and put enough pressure on the king to then get, appointed to a higher, to the position where he was able to seize dictatorial power. So as far as I think what Paxton was really saying was that as far as the mechanism by which Trump has come in to take power, it is much more in line with a legitimate democratic processes of a kind of like a failing democracy, I guess, versus Vichy, which was, it is very different to have an invasion and then, the decisions made about whether to fight on or not. At the same time, I did talk to another historian who said that as far as looking at the dynamics of collaboration, and the dynamics that we saw with the ways that the business world and the ways that, all of the supposedly anti-Trump Republicans, as well as Democrats, are responding to Trumpism, and responding to Trump's second term, that that historian that I spoke to, she said that she thought that there was, some merit to the comparison to say, when you see somebody like J.D. Vance, who built his career saying that he was opposed to Trumpism and who has now, made the decision that he's going to hitch his wagon to this movement, that does to her kind of smack of Vichyism, or somebody like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, who are now, have just become complete toadies.
So let's just talk about the Democrats here, because I think this is what it's really all about right now, because we live in a two-party country. And, not to go Ralph Nader here, but it hasn't been working out for us, in my opinion. So we're heavily reliant on a group of Democrats that include a field of, people like Ilhan Omar and like Chuck Schumer, people who are kind of all over the place. Like there's not really necessarily a consistent ideology here. Whereas now the Republicans are very united around Trumpism, whatever that might be. If you want to call it fascist, authoritarian, they're all lockstep. And you have a bunch of people in the Democrats who have different, who came in with very different ideas. What are they doing now, and why is it so scary to watch to watch helplessly as they operate?
Yeah, Mussolini, Vichy, like, regardless, people's minds are going to some dark places watching this. So, yeah.
I mean, it's hard not to when the shadow president is throwing, Hitler salutes. So, I mean, I think that what is so frightening about the Democrats is that they just don't seem to be doing much of anything, except for going along, endorsing many of Trump's cabinet picks, despite the fact that they're obviously completely unfit for office. They continue to provide, they're going along with as if there's a lot of as if this is business as usual. And they're not, for so many, I think that I don't follow Congress super closely, and I've never covered it. So this is just like me as like a news reader, more than a reporter
and a citizen.
Yes. But for so long, Democrats have refused to do any reforms to some of the structural things that have made it so difficult for Democrats to wield power when they've been in power in the Senate, like addressing the filibuster, addressing things like, these holds that different senators can put and just basically grind everything to a halt, and things that the Republicans have repeatedly used with great effect to just stymie and obstruct any kind of Democratic agenda. Now the Democrats are in the minority, and the only power that they really have is to use these structural maneuvers to try to just slow things down and jam things up. And they have been pretty shockingly uninterested in using that. And again, that is something that I think that the historian that I spoke to, Sarah Fishman, she was raising that at many points in the Vichy regime, they did have leverage. Pétain was very popular, and having him in charge kept much of the populace, kind of quieter than they might be if he had resigned in protest, say. They had the French Empire. So they had, a lot of resources and things that they could have used to try to get a better deal out of Germany, to try to potentially protect some of the civilians that were ultimately rounded up, deported, and murdered. And at every point, they just blinked and chose not to use that leverage. And I mean, I don't know. It's just frustrating, but it feels like that, is what we're again seeing from the Democrats. And I think that that's also why, you're hearing people talk about Vichy Democrats, because there's just this unwillingness to actually draw a firm line and say no.
Well, you also have figures like John Fetterman who are taking poses. I don't know what's left of that guy other than just APAC money, but at this point, Jim, it's interesting. It's like everyone's like, oh, what a cool guy, whatever. When I saw him go there, I'm like, he's a fucking asshole. Like, that's my first thought. I was like, because it's like, everybody else is dressed in a particular way, and you're the one person who doesn't do that. Like, try to imagine you're in an office where everybody was doing that and something, you'd be like, this guy's a dick.
Yeah.
Like, you imagine you're the one thing. It only works if he's like the cool, like, he's really the cool, like, whatever, democratic socialist or whatever he kind of performed as before.
It's cosplay, It's like, it's like,
cosplay.
Cool, I love your hoodie, but like, if we give you the job, you have to like do the big boy job. Please put a tie on.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like he does security at a Murphy's Law concert, and like, that's great. But the issue, like the I guess what I'm saying is like, do you see a trend of Democrats who are going to try to be MAGA in the run up to the next midterms and things like that, to try to be more MAGA in order to try to, appeal to these voters who voted against them?
I mean, I really hope not. But
that would suck.
I don't have a lot of, I don't have a lot of faith in the Democratic Party at this point. And I mean, I think that, obviously, like, there's so many different arguments about why Kamala Harris lost. And my personal opinion, I would say that this is an example of how Democrats' failure to stand up for liberal progressive values and their attempt to be kind of Trumpist light is just an utter failure. Kamala Harris, she ran as a cop. She ran as a gun owner. She ran as she wanted to be the leader of this great imperial army and this lethal fighting force. And
they sold the camouflage hats. That was the big thing, was they were marketing this like, we're actually like very much like, somebody in deep red Alabama.
I thought that was a play
right? Like
on Chapel Brown merch, right?
Was
I think it might have been.
I think it was, but I would desperately love to imagine like a Ford F-150 driving backcountry hick that loves Kamala Harris slapping on, the knockoff Midwest princess hat.
Well, I think the two thoughts are not mutually exclusive, because anytime they try to appeal to the voters that don't like them, it always has the sheen of some sort of Northeast snobbery, some kind of like West Coast, coffee shop vibe. They're not able to actually do it authentically because it's not them.
Mr. Burns talking to the residents of Springfield and being like, I love the same things that you do.
Well, and also just, they're not making the principled argument against the extreme xenophobia of the Republican Party. And they're not making a principled argument about trans rights and women's rights. I mean, Kamala did more so on women's rights, but trans rights, about Palestine. Like, these are serious moral issues that, in my opinion, like, I mean, as a leftist, like, these are the things that I care about, whether or not, America accepts asylum seekers. That's very important to me. And the fact that Joe Biden is the one who violated our commitment to accept asylum seekers, that really makes it doesn't make me think like, oh, the Democrats are being strategic and smart. It makes me think that Democrats are just doing kind of a wishy-washy version of Trump fascism. And nobody was actually making the affirmative case to say, actually, no, like, immigration is great. We should welcome refugees. We should welcome immigrants.
Their response to attacks on trans issues was to call people weirdos.
Yeah.
Which like is true, but also that's not enough. You can't just be like, oh, what do these freaks care about this so much?
No, I mean, they did not have anybody going out there. And, this is a case that exists and that a lot of people agree with, and just making the affirmative, strong case that actually, in my opinion, real feminists believe that trans women are women, and we want to protect all of our bodily autonomy and all of our rights from these creepy, fascistic genital inspectors. And there's no room between the people that are trying to take away abortion rights from cis women and the people that are trying to take away gender affirming right from trans women. It's the same thing. They're trying to deny us our rights to bodily autonomy. It's one fight. And, this kind of wishy-washy trying to like, find like the version of the fascistic politics that they think is going to play with people that, I mean, ultimately, when people are going for fascistic politics, I think that they tend to go for full hog, and that is Trumpism.
Yeah.
Why would you want like Diet Coke fascism? It's just not as filling.
I think you threw out some. I don't know if what do we call this? Vichyism. I don't know. I think you threw out something that is a nice symbolic thing there when you said Palestine. If you look at what the Biden administration did there, I don't want to go into too much detail. But it was almost like a ramp up into what is going to be happening next, with Trump talking about, full on ethnic cleansing, replacing it with a resort or whatever. And the response, forgive me, I will have my coffee and watch some MSNBC to see what they're talking about, as Trump will call it MSDNC or whatever. And Joe Scarborough what he said is made some snide remark about voters in Dearborn. Now, I happen on my mother's side as Egyptian and with Palestinian heritage. And he's just sort of like, well, I hope they're happy now, kind of thing where, and I mean, I really think that this, that it's the lesser of two evils when the level of evil is just so high. And I can just say, as somebody who did hold my nose and vote for Harris in a state where it did not matter, I was not happy about it, given what happened, what happened in Palestine. To say that to those people, I felt like saying, hey, Joe, guess what, genius? Let's say you won Michigan, you still would have got completely destroyed in the election. It wouldn't have helped you at all. And this total unwillingness to see that that something needs to be if it's a binary two-party situation, something needs to be strongly in the opposite direction to actually move the tide of the culture, to actually change the way people think. Rather than just here's a slightly softer version of the fascist policy.
Well, the Democratic Party over recent decades has tried to hold like two competing thoughts at the same time, the way I see it. They're committed base, which could include leftists or even just, diehard bleeding heart liberals, people who like really care about specific issues or specific things. They are both so important that if they don't vote for the party, they can be blamed for the loss, right? Young people, it's all the young people listening to Joe Rogan. That's why this happened. Or, it's all the people in Michigan that didn't vote out of protest. That's why this happened. They're both so important that the party will blame them for the loss. Not officially, but they're surrogates, right? And also so unimportant that you don't have to make any kind of effort to appeal to them. If you want young people to vote for you, if you want people in Dearborn to vote for you, and you really need them that bad, maybe you should try negotiating with them, right? This is a negotiation. Your job as a politician is to convince people to vote for you. And if you're not going to even engage with them and you're just going to be like, oh, well, what the fuck? So you support Trump, you love fascism. That's what this is. It's not going to work. I don't know. It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating.
I mean, I also just think, at a very kind of basic level, you cannot claim to be running against fascism at the same time that you're funding and arming genocide. People, I think, voters, the American public, whether they're in Michigan or elsewhere, I mean, I think that was just, it's not a tenable position. And I think that, just the fact that so many normal Democratic voters stayed home is kind of indicative of that. The idea that Gaza, that Israel has been carrying out genocide in Gaza, this is not a fringe position. This has been endorsed by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, by Oxfam, by, many different UN bodies, by Omer Bartov, one of the most important Holocaust studies historians. So many of the people who have, either studied human rights in the present or have studied the history of the Holocaust and have studied, what happened and the dynamics of genocide have all come out to say that is what is happening here. And I just don't think that you can expect people to trust you to fight back against fascism if you're doing that with the other hand. And not only doing that, but, pretty kind of viciously attacking the people that are trying to get you to change your mind, not engaging in any kind of debate or negotiation, not doing any kind of good faith conversation about what would be, a different potential solution for the 14 million people that live in Israel and the occupied territories, but instead just, out of hand accusing everybody, including Jews like myself, of being anti-Semitic if they have anything negative to say about, the wholesale slaughter of tens of thousands and, maybe even more than 100,000 people in Gaza.
I want to change gears a little bit. So you're a senior reporter at The Guardian. What's it like in media right now? Because as somebody who was sort of in media, nonprofit media, I guess. I never worked at a, capital P publication. I just freelanced for them sometimes. I just feel like for the last couple of years, I've just been watching all my friends get laid off. And also watching like a lot of newsrooms kind of shift in their seats and shuffle and kind of get uneasy with this sort of shift in culture and politics that has been happening in the US. I think The Guardian has been fairly resistant to that sort of what I think a lot of people would describe as like, bending of the knees or capitulations or whatever word you want to use. But I'm just curious your thoughts on what it is like to try to write about topics like this in media right now and kind of your inside baseball perspective on what's happening.
Well, so just a caveat, I have been very much outside of the media for almost 2 years before last month. So I'm just getting my feet wet again, and I'm only working part-time right now.
So we're getting the armchair take.
Yeah. So, this is, I can't really say like what the inside baseball is. What I have observed is that it seems quite dire. The huge layoffs, there's just so many fewer reporters than there were 8 years ago. And there's so much to report on, so many different federal agencies that are currently under attack, let alone, and that's not even getting into, the state legislative sessions that are going to be, amping up and everything else that's going on. So there's just, there's many fewer outlets. There's many fewer reporters to actually cover this. We're seeing so many of the billionaire owners that were, kind of praised as supposed saviors of newspapers like the LA Times and the Washington Post. We're seeing them, drop all pretense that they were not planning to interfere with these newspapers and bend the journalism to their political and commercial interests. It's pretty scary, I think. And again, I also think again that the way that the U.S. media has covered Palestine again has kind of really decreased, I would say, at least, on the left, decreased trust in the media overall at a time when I don't think, the media can't really afford to be losing. We've obviously, the right no longer trusts the mainstream legacy media. But I think that, reading the papers of record for the past year and a half, and seeing the disconnect between what gets reported in black and white and what people can see for themselves on social media is happening has also seriously undermined, just the sense of trust that the establishment media is actually telling people the truth about what's going on. And I think that that's going to continue to have, potentially like devastating consequences for all of us, because we have to be, I want people to be able to trust the media, but we have to earn that trust. And that includes not, having the kind of extreme bias against Palestinians that you see in so much of in so much of the coverage.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, on that issue in particular, tremendous financial pressure against anybody who speaks, right? Like there's, you can lose your job, you can lose, all kinds of things. And then there's, we'll pull our advertising out, we'll do this, we'll do that. And it's a way of silencing. But expanding that to the broader question of, and again, I don't know if this Trump, administration is fascism or not yet. I don't know if that's the right word. We can talk about it. I mean, to me, it's like, certainly authoritarian, right wing. Right now, we're in that ballpark. But the same kind of financial pressure, if big, well-to-do people are in support of what's happening and feel they have a financial stake in it, the same kind of pressure will be put upon writers and all these things, right? I mean, it's going to be the same kind of situation where people are going to have a difficult time getting stories in. And that's a real concern. They can, in the past, I feel like, or at least certainly during the first Trump administration, they saw a financial incentive in running out stories that were anti-Trump because there was a demand for it, and there were a lot of rich elites who hated Trump. But now he has these oligarchs on his side, and that is really, really concerning to me that we're not going to be able to get information out about what they're doing.
Absolutely, and I mean the Trump has very explicitly gone after the media and much more aggressively, both legally and with his new FCC chair, who's already launching investigations into coverage that he doesn't like. I mean, these lawsuits that Trump has filed are against like the Des Moines Register and 60 Minutes. They're not on defamation, so they're not First Amendment, is my understanding. They're actually going after I think it's like customer fraud or something like that. They're trying to expand the legal mechanisms by which they can attack the independent press. And that is going to greatly increase, just the risk and the concerns of newsrooms that are obviously do not have unlimited amounts of money to defend themselves against lawsuits. And you also, you have somebody like Elon Musk who is playing this quasi-governmental role and who has unlimited amounts of money. And I think it is a chilling effect on people's expression, because we know that he has a tendency or a history of going after, individuals, going after individual critics. And it's a concern because we have the precedent of what Peter Thiel did to Gawker, as far as, if somebody with that kind of unlimited resources decided to try to bankrupt another publication, it's very unclear how many publications could withstand that? I don't even know if any could. He's richer than everybody else.
Gawker really is the patient zero of all this, actually, now that you mention it.
Yeah. Taken down by Hulk Hogan, of all people. It seemed ridiculous at the time. But really, it was a harbinger of what to come, which is just,
it's really interesting.
Just cartoonish figure. Now I'm remembering there's like a Trump rally or something where he like ripped his shirt off and gave some, like, I think he hugged Trump or something.
Now you think of Hulk Hogan and in association with essentially American fascism, right? Which is funny because at the time you're just like, oh, wrestler naked, right? Like I knew he was like had some racist stuff in his background, but the whole culture has shifted since then. And now here he is on stage, like ripping his shirt off and whatever else.
So my takeaway from all of this is that we need our own pro wrestlers. We need a liberal Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Josie Reisman, but she has written a book about Vince McMahon, and she kind of has a theory about, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but I think it's kayfabe or kayfabe.
Kayfabe, I think.
I've never said it's kayfabe. Yeah, I've never said it.
I have read it.
Yeah,
I have written it.
Same thing with Vichy, by the way. Same thing with Vichy. Vichy kayfabe. This is the first time airing it out of my mouth and not just in my brain.
Mike, do you think kayfabe fits the what we were talking about? How Vichy is like a SoundCloud rap name, like Little
Yes, that's right.
little kayfabe.
Right. I said about Vichy, it sounds like a guy who would just like a sidebar on a 2 Chainz track or something like that.
Yeah. He's the guy on like the
Vichy.
Metro Boomin tracks that's, where they spit a line and then somebody just goes, yo.
Throwing a bone to someone in his neighborhood.
Yeah, he's got a friend from school who just really needs a chance, just really needs something right now.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, I think we covered most of it. I want to keep reading you, so I hope you stay strong in the middle of all this.
Thank you,
Julia. I admired your work before, and maybe I didn't know that you were offline for a bit because I was offline for a bit. So, but yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to more, and it was so great talking to you.
Thank you so much. That's great to talk. I love talking about Vichy friends. So thank you for having me.
Nous sommes ta jeunesse, ta flamme et ton espoir joyeux, et nous travaillons sans faiblesse, en digne fils de nos aïeux, pour que ta gloire un jour renaisse, dans un ciel clair et radieux.